So, could you tell us a little bit about the Fervent Whites for anyone who hasn't read it?
Yes, The Fervent Whites is about a woman named Sylvia Upshaw and her best friend and neighbor, Fate Jolly. They are in a lot of shock because their neighbors, Ella and James White, have been abruptly released from prison after it has come to light that they were innocent for this murder that they did not commit. The problem for Seal and Fate is that while the Whites were in prison, they told the Whites' adopted son an explosive secret that inadvertently sort of led to his death. And they are afraid that Ella and James will learn that their secret led him to that trip. Um, and they also had issues with them before they went to prison. So they are terrified. They know that this couple has they are hot-tempered people and they don't want drama. And so they are on pins and needles about this couple coming home. That's sort of the basis of the novel. Yeah.
And earlier you mentioned you're moving into genre fiction. So, what genre is the Fervent Whites?
I would say that the genre for Fervent Whites is half mystery, half thriller. And what makes it a thriller is that these people are still afraid for their safety versus a mystery. A death has happened, a murder has happened. It's about finding out who did it. But this time we got a little bit of both.
Great, cool. Um, and so because we're going to focus on time, because all I do is find quotes about time, which there are a couple from, I'll show you the ones that I'm thinking of adding. Um,
Okay.
Time ends up, I think, being really thematically important in this novel. I didn't really have to like stretch my brain to connect it in terms of just like the fact that when we start the book, things have already happened, and the things that have happened are integral to the plot.
Hmm.
And things of the past are what's like most important to the characters themselves. So how does time change the way your characters understand the past and the present in the novel?
Um, I think the way time works with the character's understanding is that when you have a potential murderer on the loose, you have to think about you have to think about your safety. You have to think about past conversations, what they could have meant, what they parts that may not mean anything at all. So there's a sense of urgency. There's not a lot of time to ponder because the threat could be lurking around your house as you even think. Seal doesn't even get to really mourn. Don't want to spoil, but Seal doesn't even get to really grieve a big loss because there is imminent threat as she's trying to grieve. Um, so I would say in this book, time is an engine. It really keeps them on edge. Um, but also, what's going on in the novel makes Seal realize that time has not changed race relations in the country. She thinks back to a childhood incident of racist vandalism and realizing that this is just a more heightened form of it in the 80s that she experienced as a little girl in the 40s. So she has having to reckon with the fact that time has moved on, but uh, but people and situations have not so much.
Hmm. Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely. And I think that that was something that I thought was really interesting was how time showed up. It's sort of like the history of the country. So, in terms of race, but also in terms of gender and in terms of sexuality, and also in terms
Mhm.
of war.
Right.
Um, and sort of like the shadow of that history is still looming over the town. Um,
Absolutely.
and so, and especially also the thinking about sexuality in particular, could you speak a little bit on that? Like where we are in the 1980s in terms of like the country's relationship to understanding or accepting people of different sexualities.
Right. Yeah. So, you know, um, one would think it would things would not be so homophobic still in the 80s. Things seem very liberated and stuff on the surface. Um, but gay people are still being uh persecuted in a way. I forget what year it became legal to go to a gay bar in New York, but I don't think 1981 was far from that date. you know. Um, so gay men are still having to be closeted. And then the AIDS the AIDS epidemic is beginning to surface around this time. And I don't think they have a name for it. They're calling it the gay cancer at this stage. Um, but but gay people they do have their own secret communities, and even though there may not be a lot of establishments, public establishments, they are having salons and stuff at their houses as Vincent attends one on the night that there's a murder. And so I think I wanted to make sure that the book touches on the closetedness of things, but also show that gay people still they had some agency and they created space for themselves privately. And that they had unconventional, air quotes, and unconventional relationships. There's a couple in the 1980s, early 1980s, who are essentially in an open relationship, you know. And I think that that was more common than we think.
Definitely. And that's interesting that you say that now, because now I'm contrasting that against like a lot of the heterosexual cheating that happens in this book or preoccupation with even if you're divorced, even the preoccupation with being seen with another person.
Right.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting. Um,
Yeah.
and you're also making me think about then the value. We have this very, very, very small community, but within this community, um, we have Black people, gay people, white people, and sort of the way they interact with each other and whether or not they can like keep themselves as a tight-knit community, maybe will also inform the future.
hmm Yeah. I think the people of Fervent are they're they are mostly good to each other, and their differences aren't that big of a deal. But they know that outside of off the island, so to speak, they know that people are not as so homogenous or not so inviting of difference. So Paul Hope, the man who's murdered off stage, was a racist, and he just lives a few miles away from Fervent. Um, and so, yeah, the people of Fervent are doing very well with community and race relations compared to people who live just a few miles away.
Yeah, even
Mm.
the whites who are returning after being convicted of murder are being greeted warmly, no matter how uncomfortable
Yeah,
people. It's a fervent, it's a community above everything else.
right, right. They're like, we can forgive. We know they haven't always been nice, but they did not murder Paul Hope. So let's let them back in and treat them kindly until they offend us again, which
Yeah.
they do.
Yeah, totally. And can you also talk a little bit about the creation of Fervent and your relationship to the area, why you chose the Hudson Valley, and why it seemed like the right setting for this story about this subject matter.
Sure. So in the summer of 2020, my lease in Brooklyn ended. And my partner and I, my then partner and I said, well, maybe we should go somewhere that's quiet. We can't, life is shut down in New York. You can barely go anywhere at all. And I was working on my second book, and I thought, that might be a good idea to be like a long-term residency. And we can just kind of live life in a slower pace and save some. It'll be a bit cheaper. It turned out not to be that much cheaper. But that's the way I came to live in Saugerties on a hamlet called Malden on Hudson. And what I realized within maybe a week or two of living there is that my landlord and his family and myself and maybe one other Latino man were the only people of color living there full time. Um, and I noticed when I would go on walks, I would say about half of the people, and this was summer, so people were outside a lot. Um, about half of the people that I would greet would say hello, and some of them just would not. They're like, no, I'm not being friendly with you. And so I had to decide. I was like, now, is this because I'm black? Is this because I'm gay? Because sometimes my partner and we went on walks together. Um, or is it because I'm an outsider? Because there had been a lot of talk about people upstate hating that people from the city were moving up. So I was like, which one is it? But then over time, I was able to see, oh, they're speaking to these other touristy people who are clearly up from Manhattan for the day, walking around. They're saying hello to them and even asking them questions. And I was like, oh, this is race, unfortunately. And so, that was planted in my mind. And I, there was a moment where I toyed with maybe trying to live long term upstate, but that was just a blip. I knew I wouldn't be there for long, so I didn't suffer, you know. But so that put a seed in my brain about, okay, living upstate New York, not a lot of black people upstate at all, and definitely not a lot of people of color in this neighborhood. But again, I'm working on a whole nother book. Um, Time goes by, and the Tops grocery store shooting happens in Buffalo. And I remember Googling, because at that point I had left the Hudson Valley. And I remember Googling to find some information about the Tops shooting, read up on it, and it made me think about race upstate New York and how similar it is to race in the South. And I can't remember exactly what I put into the search engine, but it must have been something like race related crime, upstate New York or something. And I got this hit about this basically a serial killer named Christoph Joseph, or either Joseph Christoph. I keep forgetting his real name. And that's how I came up with the character Christopher Josie. But he was killing black people, just pretty much black people only. Um, and killing them in kind of Jeffrey Dahmer-ish sorts of ways, not just a bullet, not just a cutthroat. Like he was butchering black people. And I said, well, I'm gonna have to use that in the novel if I write a novel about this. And so that's where the story came from. Other things such as cross-racial adoption, um, other things like that, they came later, as ways to make it more, I don't know, more fleshed out, aside from it just being about black people and white people not getting along in a predominantly white area. I was like, I gotta add something to it that's not about, it turns out to be about race because it's cross-racial adoption. But I wanted some to pull on heartstrings that had to do with like parenting and family as well. Yeah.
And this isn't the first novel that the main protagonist is a woman.
Right.
Could you speak a little bit on that as a male writer?
Yeah. So I grew up being raised, I grew up in a two-parent home, but the men in my family were just, well, I should say I was a different type of boy. And so I spent almost all my time with the women. And I think the women saw that I was likely going to be presenting gay, signals of being gay. And so they kept me around them, essentially. Um, and the men were kind for the most part, but I was not welcomed into their circle. So I spent so much time with women, listening to women, learning what women, or at least these group of women, my aunts, my babysitters, those, learning what annoyed them, learning what they liked, learning what about men they didn't like, what about other women they didn't like, and all of that really has informed how I write and the reason why I primarily write from the female point of view. I don't have a lot of access to the straight male point of view. I obviously have access to the gay male point of view, but I don't know. I don't know that I have a story to tell from the gay point of view right now that would be wildly different from what other gay men are writing.
Mhm.
um, and when I say that to my agent, he's like, that's crazy. You have a lot of experiences and stuff. And I'm like, but yeah, but I know other people who have very, very similar experiences, you know? So,
Right. And you are still, I mean, the character Fate is very fleshed out, but like through Syl, we have a different understanding than we would have had if Fate were the main protagonist of the
e-
story.
exactly. Yeah. And my agent gave me a really, really good suggestion after he read the first draft. He said, what if fate has a POV and then his POV ends at some point in the novel? And at first, I was like, that is a fabulous idea. But then the more I thought about it, I was like, no, I just want Seal. I want this to be Seal's story.
Yeah.
You know? Hmm.
Yeah. And it was.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Um, and so then sort of your writing process, thinking about the character you want to use and also larger historical events. These are two very different sort of perspectives. You have like the history of the entire country, and then you have the life of one woman. And
Hmm.
how do you approach infusing both of those things in one story?
Yeah. What I try to do is I try to keep the historical events very much in the background. They need to be acknowledged because they inform what people's worries are, But I try to what I learned when I wrote in West Mills. I remember one agent who read a draft said the beginning of your novel is during the World War II, and your characters barely mention war. And I didn't get a chance. I didn't respond to her with this explanation, but I thought to myself, every community of people don't talk about politics on a daily basis. They are obviously feeling the effects, but they may not even understand that it's due to the war, you know? Um, and so what I didn't want to do is write a book where a historical event is being mentioned every other page or even every other chapter. I just want the people to deal with the effects of it. So with Fervent, there's this serial killer, for example, and they know once he's caught and confesses, then they know they're safe from him. But when they learn that he has a disciple out trying to be a copycat, um, then they have to decide. They have to decide, how serious is this? And okay, yeah, he might get one person, but should we upend our lives and flee for, you know? So I like for historical events to be mentioned just so that readers understand what's percolating on the characters' minds, but I don't want the historical event to be the book, Like I could never write a 9/11 novel because, that was too catastrophic to ignore the details of the events of that day, you know?
Yes. No, that's true. And it also is interesting thinking about like the concerns of a community during the AIDS crisis or
Hmm.
during a tense racial moment in this country. There's a serial killer there. That's the concern.
That's the concern.
I
Yeah,
mean, and even, and I don't know, you were talking about pandemic before, in terms of like, I was young during 9/11, but like the pandemic felt like the first moment that collectively we all decided this is historical. This
right.
is like we assigned it a name. Like
Yes.
the AIDS crisis wasn't the AIDS crisis until we looked back on it.
We look back on it. Right,
But
right.
the COVID-19 pandemic was the COVID-19 pandemic the very minute
Exactly.
it started.
Absolutely. Right. So yeah, they're not, the whole AIDS pandemic or epidemic. Oops, I'm sorry. I forgot to do not disturb.
Oh, don't worry.
Um and people aren't necessarily all that worried about it yet. They just know that there's this sickness that gay men are dying from. And they're just like, well, most of us aren't gay. Fate is the only one here that really needs to be concerned about it. Um, but yeah, it's a serious thing, but they're just like, does not our thing. This person who could come and kill us is what's more important. It's more urgent. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I have two more
Mhm.
questions. One that I didn't text to you, but I was relooking at the book and just thinking about the prison system also, which
Mhm.
you don't totally get into, and the whites don't feel like sympathetic characters, so I wasn't really concerned about how they felt when they were gone for a year and a half, but the result of them being gone for a year and a half is them coming back with a lot of rage,
Yeah.
psychosis, like personality changes.
Right.
And I was wondering if you had any thoughts of like the punishment of prison is really the taking away of time from a person.
Mhm.
And so what do you think are the effects of that punishment of time?
Right. Yeah, I would say if I had to take a guess, if I would put myself in the shoes of James and Ella White, I would think losing 18 months of my life, being likely treated like an animal, because they're accused of doing like really heinous murder, even though it's the murder of just one person. The way this man was murdered, people probably think they are animals. So being looked at as a awful, awful, hideous person when you're not, or at least for not for that reason, um, being torn away from your child, regardless of them being adopted and racial ambiguity, how one feels about race in James' case. Um, I would imagine it drives people to a deep anger and wanting a lot of revenge, even if they had come out and their son had been alive. Um, I would imagine they would come out and want some sort of satisfaction for the time that they lost and suffered. And because I mean, I don't know, I don't know. From what we see on TV, it looks like there are a lot of bullies in prison who just pick fights just to let you know who they are, and that alone would send me into a deep depression that I could walk out of my cell and be beaten up just for someone to prove a point that they are powerful, you
Yeah.
know? So I would definitely come out of prison being mad at everybody.
Yeah. And so your time in prison, the routine, everything changes, but the main, like when you're standing there in front of the judge, you get a
Right,
certain number of years. And part of it is you have to spend time in this place where no one would want to spend time. And the other issue is
right.
that you lose everything
You
else.
lose everything. Yep. And do
Yeah.
you really gain it back when you come out? Like even whether you're innocent or guilty, do like the characters say, we know that stain will not wash off of us ever. You know,
Right.
do people ever forget that you were even accused of a murder like that?
And time might be one of the only things that we actually cannot recover or get back. Every second
Exactly.
that passes, we've lost.
We've lost. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Last question. A few different characters in the novel say something along the lines of time heals, time makes us forget. And I'm wondering if you think that the Fervent Whites, the novel, agrees or disagrees with that sentiment that time is healing or
hmm
can heal.
Yeah. I think that the novel disagrees. Yeah. And I think the reason for that is because we see that Seal, when they learn that this man is on the loose, Seal immediately thinks about racially motivated crimes in the 1940s. So there's one way that we see that time has not really healed this country at all, or the world. And even though the novel ends on a hopeful note, and there's harmony in Seal's home, like she can be with the man she loves. Her children are back with her safe, and her children are going off to college, and Mrs. Talbot is there having Thanksgiving dinner with them, or Christmas, whichever one it is, and she has a plan for land that she has just purchased. The truth, what we know today in 2024, is that that harmony is temporary. Maybe not for them, but that type of harmony only exists in small pockets over the world. That things are largely still very segregated, and that final scene is not this final scene going on in most people's homes across the country. Yeah.
Mhm.
So time can do some healing, but I don't think it heals all. Yeah.
Yeah, and the town of Fervent is never going to forget any of the events of
None of the
1981 and
events.
1982.
Right. Yeah. And that the last sort of sad crime that happens is a white man taking a black person's life, you know? Yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, the novel would say no, time doesn't. Time only heals things temporarily, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, until the scab gets torn off.